Well, welcome everyone tonight for our Executive Function and Speech Therapy Part 1. Part objectives. We want to be able to name some important characteristics of students with executive function disorder, learn some strategies, especially on how to work with those students or increase their progress and therapy goals, and identify some resources to help with managing not just executive function disorder, but challenging learning and behavior issues for students. So we'll be talking about all of those things tonight. As we talk through things today, just kind of want to mention that there's kind of a shift or change in looking at executive functions. I didn't mention this, but I've been in the field a long time, and when I first started hearing about executive functioning and the characteristics, it was in conjunction with brain injury, and especially injury to the frontal lobe. And I remember, a lot of information came out about that. And so that's where in the field we really started hearing about it. However, that's kind of changed, and actually we're beginning to see a lot of folks in education arenas talking about executive functioning, as well as we see a lot of it now in autism. I know Michelle Garcia Winner, a person who's really noted for her work with autism, talks about it, has some books on it. I see it mentioned more often also with students with ADHD and actually students who've never been diagnosed as having executive function disorder but have those characteristics. So what we're kind of learning now is that, okay, so these kids have these challenging characteristics or these challenging learning and behavior issues. Does it matter if they're actually diagnosed, by a doctor, medical doctor, psychologist, whomever? Does it matter that they're diagnosed, or do we just look at these behaviors and learn about these strategies and try to improve our students' behavior, especially, as it relates to therapy? So that's kind of where I'm coming from tonight, that we're going to talk about some general things about executive function, and then we're going to really get into some strategies. And what I want to challenge you is to think about the kids in your therapy sessions. Do you have some kids who have these issues? And then are these strategies helpful? Could these be things that you could try in your therapy room? So when you look at how you define executive function, there are some components that come up over and over again, and that is difficulty inhibiting actions, restraining or delaying responses. There's our ADHD kids and impulsive kids who just can't pull it back, they just respond immediately. What about attending? We have some kids who have selective attending skills or focusing skills. And then, are these kids able to set goals and figure out a plan? If they're given an assignment that involves many steps, can they figure it out? Can they plan ahead or organize and maintain and shifting set? And I like to think of that as transitioning. Can they end one set and shift or transition to the next? And that could be a therapy activity, a learning activity in the classroom. And so the other thing that we see a lot in the literature is that there is a relationship between executive functions, attention, and working memory. So how do you define executive function? And Singer and Bashir defined it as the decision-making and planning processes that are invoked at the onset of a task in the face of a novel challenge. They are directly involved with inhibition and working memory. They are involved in defining the problem at hand, stopping to plan and analyze rather than act. So how many kids do we know who just respond and act without stopping to plan or thinking through a problem? And we know those kids have trouble in school. I mean, there's just no question. And then if your district is really into some of the things that are in the Common Core, such as application-based projects, which have a lot of steps to them, then our kids who have these problems are really, really struggling. Okay. And then a lot of people, when they talk about executive function, talk about self-regulation. And I know Michelle Garcia Winner, as I mentioned, talks a lot about that with the autism population. But self-regulation refers to a set of behaviors that are used flexibly to guide, monitor, and direct the success of one's performance. So in self-regulation, we look at things like, can you observe yourself or self-monitor? And that's really hard for some of these kids to actually look at, what am I doing? You know, and then almost the only way you can start to change your behavior is to realize you're doing it. And then can you evaluate what you've just done? You've just done something, it went wrong, it just blew up. Okay, can I go back and think through what happened here? Can I evaluate my actions? And then self-reaction, can you make an adjustment? Okay, so it didn't go well. I've just figured out kind of what I did that was wrong. Can I adjust and not do it the next time? And so many of these kids just do the same kind of problematic behavior over and over again. So each of these things involves some self-reflection, and self-regulation is seen in how students get ready for learning, stay engaged with the tasks, and alter their approaches to problem solving. And because of that bullet and some of the other things we'll talk about, the education community, special education, psychologists, and general educators too, are really beginning to look at these pieces of executive function and how they impact kids in the classroom. And then together, executive functions and self-regulatory processes are central to cognitive, linguistic, behavioral, and affective control, all of which are central to learning and success in school. So executive function is a big deal for success in school. Okay, so let's now go back and think about learning and behavior. And there's certain things that are happening to us as SLPs in the field. Many of us are experiencing an increase in caseload size, and so that means our groups are bigger. Often we have trouble scheduling groups. We're trying to do pull-out speech therapy, and we're trying to get kids with similar grade levels or similar disorders or compatibility for behaviors. However, often we have groups that are just a huge mixture and they don't work well together. And so sometimes there'll be one or two kids in your group who disrupt everything and kind of keep you from going with the flow and having your therapy session flow well. So you have to go back and think, well, how do you provide therapy that's needed when the group doesn't work out and you can't change it? And sometimes we can't. So what are some things we could do with those students to keep them from interrupting or just improve not only their therapy performance or success in therapy, but the rest of the kids in the group as well? When we have kids with multiple learning issues and problematic behaviors, sometimes they disrupt things to the point that the other students are really not getting the therapy on their IEP. And what can you do? And sometimes SLPs tell me that they dismiss the disruptive kids or send them to the office or send them back to their classroom. But if we do that, then those students are not getting their therapy time. So you really sometimes find yourself in a bind just thinking, I'm having a real hard time rescheduling these kids. They're disrupting the group. This group is not moving like some of the others where I don't have someone interrupting all the time. So what can you do? What can you do if a student's behavior does not allow you to address their IEP goals adequately? Now that's a big question, and there are many reasons for behavior issues, so I know that we won't solve them all tonight, but what I do hope is that we'll give you some good ideas that you can take back to your therapy room and allow you to work with some of your kids and try something different. That truthfully has been my learning curve for this information. As I got really interested in it and went back and did some more research, I felt like, oh wow, I wish I had known that with this group. I would have tried something different. Okay, so as we think about that, there are a couple resources and initiatives going on in our schools that might help us. Um, there is a big question about, are there some things that we can do to prevent behavior problems? Now, I know what it's like to be an itinerant SLP or an SLP without a dedicated therapy room, and you have to move, you know, when there's a room available. And there are all sorts of reasons for that, why that might happen. Hopefully it doesn't happen all year. But at times you find yourself in a situation where you can't control the room. You know, you have no control, I should say, over the room situation. So when that happens, you know, some of these things might not work. But there are also many of us who do have a dedicated therapy room and have some options on how we set things up. And so when you do have those options, there are some things to think about. So we'll talk over those. And they are really kind of simple, practical things. So it may be something you just haven't thought of. You knew about it, but maybe in your situation things were just so hectic, as I certainly had that, where I was running from school to school. I had two different schools and things were crazy and schedules get messed up, and sometimes I just felt like all I did was run all day. And then at the end of the day, I didn't always have time to sit down and reflect on what happened and why this kid's behavior, you know, happened this way, or some other kid's behavior just disrupted things. I didn't have a chance to problem solve. So it's kind of putting a bug in your ear to kind of think about that and think about your difficult groups as we go through things tonight. There also is a movement in schools called Positive Behavior Supports, and sometimes it's called PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Supports. And it's a model that was adopted by IDEA, and it has some pieces to it that obligate school districts to do some things for students who have behavior issues. So it makes do some assessment, use some techniques, look at emphasizing preventing problematic behavior. So there's actually research about that, looking at, you know, what you need to look at, what are some things that prevent behavior issues, and then teaching some alternative behaviors and employing some meaningful consequences to enhance the quality of life. Because kids who have poor behavior issues or problematic behavior issues often kind of have a bad, you know, life, maybe bad social life, or just not happy at school. So we want to kind of look at those. So we're going to touch on those very briefly, and then looking at antecedents. What triggers the problem behavior? And actually, that's been one of the most interesting things in learning about positive behavior supports, is that you try to understand what happened, the physical, the social, the environment, that set the stage and then triggered the behavior. And so our behavior specialists in the schools, our special education teachers, should have been trained on this. Hopefully they have been. And it's something that we can look at to try to figure out, why does Johnny blurt out and interrupt the whole class? Well, Johnny probably does that in our therapy room too. So we kind of look at some of those things. And then, are there some things in the environment, in the classroom, that we can kind of arrange differently to help prevent behavior problems? And when we look at that, most of the research is on classrooms, but we also can think of our therapy room as a mini classroom, and there might be some things in that research that could help us too. It just kind of depends on your situation, because as you know, SLPs have all different kinds of situations in the schools that they work in. Okay, so when we talk about engineering the environment, I'm going to start with some of the simple things first. If we have control over our room situation, not talking about times you have to borrow a room and you have to run in and set up and then get the kids, but when we have some control, then we need to look at how we organize the room and the materials, the seating arrangement. I know you've probably thought about that. We don't put two behavior problem kids together, usually in our therapy room, but they're sure close to each other because of our little table. Sometimes lighting. Lighting didn't seem as much of a concern to me, but for some kids it is. minimizing distractibility in some situations. Now, when your therapy room is next to the band room in your school or next to PE, sometimes you have, you know, like no control over minimizing that stuff. But if you can, you want to do it. You also, we're going to talk a little bit about setting class rules. That's really important in the general ed and special education classroom, and it could make a difference in our therapy rooms. And then having a good classroom routine and looking at activity schedules or visual schedules that could facilitate transition. So I found this on Pinterest and I just loved it. Who was this SLP who posted her therapy room and then even went to the extent of defining all the things in her therapy room? But actually, it is just a great example. First of all, you'll notice she makes great use of her walls and even the fronts of her cabinets and even her bookshelf. So she has WH questions on the side of her bookshelf. She uses a lot of visuals. She has a whiteboard, and on her whiteboard is a rule chart. Now, we can't really see what the rules are, but that's an important part. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then you see there's an RTIC activity, and there's the red light, green light, yellow light that she uses to give kids feedback about their articulation attempts. There's other things up there. I'm not sure. I forget what EET means. I think I knew at one point, but now I don't remember. But you see there's sounds and many things up there. At the table, she has room for groups of 4 and can stand with groups of 5. If you look at the end of the table, just kind of take a look at the things that are back there. And I'm going to bring that back up when we talk in a minute. But, you know, of course, they're at the end away from grabbing hands. She has an articulation starters pocket chart on her closet, and I love what she calls the closet is the closet or the cabinet. She calls it the closet of doom because she's packed so much in there, and if you open the door it might fall on you. And then there's some things up above, but the major thing you see is that it's very organized. And even though it's a teeny tiny room to me, it's neat and organized, and when the kids come in, hopefully she has a routine so they know where to sit. They know what how to get started, and so it's just a good example of how you can organize your room. Not that you have tons of time to do that, but I know I let my room get pretty bad at times with stacks of things, and that just makes an opportunity for disorganized and easily distracted kids to get distracted. Okay, and then here's one more. This is more of a middle school or high school type room. I had a room exactly like this in a middle school I worked in, and I had those cubbies at the back, and I did the same thing. I put my resource books up there, but I kept one open so that every once in a while, if we had an activity and there was a kid who needed to work by himself, then he could go there. I noticed if you're looking at those cubbies, you'll notice that there's a visual picture, either schedule or activity thing, Velcro thing there. So that SLP obviously uses that. There's some visuals on what is sort of like a bulletin board on that black paper behind them. And then you'll notice that all the things that she uses are set up really nice in the and organized in her cabinet and of course the filing cabinet. Anyways, it's just a thought to think about your room organization. Are things out of the way so that kids aren't tempted to get into things or get distracted? And you know, if you have someone who's already disorganized and you have a disorganized room, it just kind of builds upon each other. Okay, so the other thing I always think about is that therapy minutes are precious. You know, you get them in there, you feel like some of them come late, or if you have to go get them, you're losing minutes while you walk down the hall. So they're precious, so you want to make sure that you have everything ready, which is hard if you're kind of in an assembly line process. So kind of thinking about that, I actually got into at one point having periodically during my therapy day, having 5 or 10 minutes open so that I could like reorganize and put everything back from the previous couple groups. But I know that I've done this, but sometimes I didn't have the materials I needed right there at my fingertips. So I wasted a few minutes and gave them some downtime trying to find them, and then they got distracted and off task, and sometimes that's when behavior issues happen. Let's see, and then just again to make a point for if you have a consistent therapy room, use the walls for instructional purposes. You don't have to search for cards or materials if they're up on the wall. Then you just turn to them, and then the kids see them a lot, and just like they see kind of graphic organizers up in the bulletin boards in their classroom, they begin to internalize and really learn the stuff that's up on your wall. Seating arrangement probably goes without saying, but you know the ones who are disruptive need to be close to you in the front. You don't want to sit them together. And then you want to, though, begin to develop some partner activities or cooperative groups. Since when we do pull-out, we work in small groups, there's a lot in the standards, especially the Common Core standards, but other state standards that aren't following the Common Core, about being able to have academic discussions one-on-one, in small group, and in the whole classroom. So anything that you can do to generate some skills about working together as a team, taking turns, all of those things can help. So this is just, I copied a few things, copy and paste a few things off the internet. Many years ago, I think it was like in the 80s, someone came up with this term, cooperative groups. And they gave kids a task, and then they assigned them roles. So on the right-hand side, if you look at the top, we have reporter, group organizer, timekeeper, note taker. Now, these roles can change. You would have to train the kids to learn what they are. You might even give them little buttons. Today, you are the reporter, or today you are. But you would almost take some therapy time to train them on what these roles are. Then you give them a task, and they, you know, use those roles. And what they have to do is think about what they understand and how they can work in a group, how to get the tasks done, taking responsibility for the contribution, being, you know, effective ways of working in a group, active listening, perspective, taking perspectives. And this keeps talking about sustainability issue because that was related to their task. But if you just kind of go beyond that, how do they work face-to-face? How do they work with a common purpose? And understand that each person has a role and you can't achieve it without each other. Now, if we could periodically do some things like that in therapy, you would be really helping your students learn how to work in a group on something that's kind of standards-based or required. Now, I did include this. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but these are cooperative group learning strategies, and Johnson & Johnson, there at the bottom in 1986, kind of wrote the first book on it. I actually knew a couple SLPs who really got into this and did publish talks. I saw one at ASHA on how you use cooperative groups in therapy, and usually they earn points. Now, often, like if we're not grading students because we're not classroom teachers, the points, you know, you'd use them in a variety of ways, but the points would be reinforcers. And there comes a time when they actually do a reflective piece. They make a T-chart, and they talk about how each person did their role, how they can improve. So anyways, there's a lot of interesting things about this concept. So keep it in mind. Okay. Classroom rules. I read a book. It's called The Tough Kid Book, and it was for behavior management and dealing with kids who have tough behaviors. And the authors talked about developing classroom rules. And I think even, I see many SLPs who do that, develop a list of rules and post them on their wall. But what I don't see, and I myself was guilty of that, is that they review them periodically and actually try to teach them or teach the concepts. So what the Tough Kid Book says is that you develop some minimum or basic expectations for all students who come in your therapy room. Now that's tough because we deal with a range of ages, but usually you can come up with some similar ones. You post it publicly, you on your wall. You make sure that each rule is observable, measurable, stated positively, and you should have 5 or less. And that's important. Not too many rules, kids don't get it. And it should be paired with visual prompts or pictures. And it should not leave a question. It should not be stated in question form. So this is an example of some class rules from, I think, probably a special education class. You know, we respect others and their property. We will raise our hand when we want to speak. We'll listen to the teacher and follow directions. We will use inside voices. We will walk in the classroom. Now, we would probably say we will walk in the hall going to therapy. And then at the bottom are pictures, and they are laminated and have Velcro on the back. So when this teacher goes over the rules, she often makes it a classroom activity and asks the kids, okay, Johnny, do number 1. Go find the picture and you know, paste it up by number 1. So that you can use this as an interactive activity as well. And then there are some things, I won't go over all of this either, but that we actually learned from classroom teachers, especially kindergarten, how they went over the rules the first 2 weeks of school and, you know, went kind of over and over them. They demonstrated them. They had the kids talk about it. They had the kids act them out. And then they had the kids act, you know, like take turns, like I said, Johnny will do number 1, Susie will do number 2, or maybe after they feel like the kids have really learned them, they'll pick one student of the day who gets to tell the rules, and then they love to show off and tell the rules. Well, with older kids, you'd probably do that a little bit differently, but there are still ways that you could talk about it. And again, I like to go over what would happen if you don't follow the rules, and then what will happen if the rule is followed versus if the rule is not followed. And usually they say 2 weeks. Well, because we see kids once or twice a week, you might need to do it longer than that. And when kids are, when rules are violated, then you can go over all the rules again. You can go over them after holidays, things like that. So here are some examples. Here's one from a speech room. You know, be respectful, take turns, listen, follow directions, safety first. Now in this one we struggled because respect is a hard word, a big concept. And we found this on Google Images. Actually, Google Images has a lot of good things about rules. So you may want to take a look there if you decide to have some. And even though we're at the end of the school year, you could still bring them in, but our idea is to use them at the beginning of the school year to start teaching them. And you set expectations and expectations for behavior, and then that can carry you through the whole year. But I like this one. Respect means I treat people the way I want them to treat me. Respect means showing consideration, courtesy, and care for someone or something. Okay, here's another one. And I thought some of these were cute. Follow directions, be respectful. I like that visual there. Use your inside voices, stay in your seats, raise your hands and wait your turn. I love the raise your hands visual. And here's another one. Now, I used this one in middle school, and it is old, like 1994. But it was when Schreiber and McKinley, two, great speech pathologists, began to look at the issues between communication and behavior. And they developed a lot of things. They were really into discourse skills too and conversation skills. And so I used to use this. But actually, now that I look at it, it's not totally what I needed. But I did go over these with my kids and try to talk about how you have to be a good speaker and a good listener. Now I might do that differently. Now I might want more pictures. And this is just an example of maybe like with my older kids, I might have a rules for like in the classroom or in the therapy room, but I also might want to teach conversation rules with something like this. So they might be two different things, or they could be incorporated. It just depends on your kids and what they need. But, you know, the one about eye contact and paying attention to each other, taking turns, respond to keep the conversation going, and then stay on topic. So those are some things that my middle school kids needed to work on. Okay, so that kind of covers some, again, these are preventing behavior issues and being organized, and sometimes these things will be enough to curb behavior issues in your therapy room, but not always. Another thing is kind of looking at your therapy room schedule, not your day-to-day schedule, but how your therapy session flows. Again, we know downtime can cause problems, so you might want to develop a routine for therapy. Like I had my kids always working out of folders. Anything we did, I'd have them save it in their folder. So you might teach them the folders are in a basket. You might have them kind of grouped in a way that makes it easy for them to find them. And so maybe one of their routines is to walk into the therapy room, get their folder, and sit down at the table. Now, it could be something else too. You want to minimize or structure transitions. You might want to have a public posting or posting for the kids on what today's therapy schedule or therapy activities might look like. You want to reinforce students for attending to tasks, achieving their goals, and having a good day in therapy. So many of us have a chart somewhere in our room where they get stickers or stars for having a good day in therapy, or it might be in their folder too. There's so many different ways that you can do that. Okay, and I was going to say one more thing about seating. One of my therapists that I worked with had a really good relationship with her kindergarten teacher, and she picked up on the rules thing I was telling you about, and the kids had a pointer and they would go up and do the rules, and then she would put a picture on the back of their chairs, and she would rotate them and change them by holidays. So if it was Halloween, there might be a chair with a pumpkin on it, there might be a chair with a ghost picture on the back. Just simple pictures you can, print out or even color. And so she might have 4 or 5 chairs, and each would have a picture on the back. And then she would teach her kids as they entered the room. She'd say, "Today you are the ghost." And go to, and so they might keep those chairs for a couple weeks or a month or whatever until that holiday passes. And then they go on to another holiday, and she used that as a way to have kids go to the right chair. And so that the kids who are having problems attending, or kids who would get into trouble if they sat near each other, all of those things she took care of by telling them where they needed to sit based on the picture. So then the kids didn't get the idea that they were being reprimanded. Johnny and Joey, don't you ever sit together. You want to say that, but you can keep them apart. Anyways, that was a creative thing that she did. Okay, here's an example, and I think this is like a preschool kind of therapy room, but guess what? Today we will say hello, read a book, play a game, make a craft, and say goodbye. And then they may do something where maybe one of the kids puts the each time they do something, they take it, it's Velcroed or whatever, and put it up on I think this might be a flannel board or whatever, so that the kids are, kind of interacting and paying attention and are with the schedule. And then, of course, if we have kids like with autism who have trouble transitioning, they get used to this. They have a visual, they get used to how the therapy room flows, and you can change it up and they'll be okay because they're used to this format. Another example, this is actually from a high school language arts class. There was a really cool article, I think I put it in the references, about teaching students. It had to do with self-monitoring, but one of the things, there were several, maybe 5 or 6 kids with autism, can't remember the exact number, in the classroom, and the gen ed teacher realized that they needed a pictorial schedule. They needed more to help them know how the class period was going to flow. So they start with sustained silent reading. They read a novel, they do a writing activity in their journal. And so the teacher used that, and he had a whiteboard, so he was able to put things up really easily there. But I just thought that was really cool, a gen ed teacher understanding that sometimes kids with autism have to understand how it's going to flow, and that helps them with transition, and they can switch from activity to activity because they're aware of it. Okay, then so using activity schedules or visual schedules, you know, there's so many different ways we can use them, and I bet many of you do already, but maybe going beyond using them just for kids with autism, but kids with executive function type behaviors. So, you know, having that routine in the therapy room, helping them learn some new behaviors with picture activity schedule type things, sequencing tasks or assignments, helping them learn consequences and manage their behavior, helping them transition. And you know that you can use, of course we know that, objects, photos, pictures, or symbols. We all like to get to the picture stage and the symbol stage. Okay, so here's just a simple one. You've probably seen things like this a lot. The morning schedule, what you need to do for the morning, you know, the routine, and then snack, bathroom, reading, you know, I mean, those just are so helpful with young kids, but can be used with older kids too. I like this one because this looked like a bunch of different activities that might take place in speech therapy. So I might maybe pick out the most common things I do in my therapy room and, you know, print them, you know, print them out, laminate them, cut them out, and Velcro them, or put Velcro on the back, and then have like a whiteboard or someplace where you can change it out for each group. Because you've got them all there, it's really easy that you could change this out, choose, you know, so that based on your daily therapy schedule, all kids who come in will know what's expected, what you're going to do that day. It's hard because we change, you know, we individualize for each group, so it's not easy to continually change out what you're going to do. But it's possible, especially with the picture cards, and then sometimes having the kids help you change it out. You know, Johnny comes in, Johnny, would you please take down the schedule pictures? You know, we're going to do something different. And he takes them down, and then we have them on a sheet or something, and Johnny, would you put up what we're going to do first? You know, so again, involving the kids in the activity. Here's just some more examples of daily schedules. I don't know what this is here. Here are just some examples of like a daily schedule. And then I like this, the one on the left is teaching an activity, and it's teaching toileting. So much fun. Okay. Now I'm having trouble switching. I hope that was not a issue that I just had. Okay, this was an example of some words you might put on a wall, and I think this is from a special ed class, but again, there are activities that would happen in class that you maybe don't want to put in a daily schedule all the time, but you want to teach these concepts or use these daily. I'm not sure how we would use all of these, but they certainly would teach kids how to express themselves and what concepts they need. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention, just thinking of quick and easy techniques that help you manage your behavior and kids in the group. And this is called a speech box. And I used to have one of these, and I just pull it out whenever I had to do a change up in therapy. Things weren't working. I might be losing the group. Maybe it didn't turn out the way I thought it would, and so I need to adjust. And so I just have these at my fingertips. And if you remember that first small therapy room with the closet of doom, that therapist had a basket at the end of the table, and it had things in there like I used to put in my speech box. Have a few toys, have some interesting stimulus pictures, maybe some compare and contrast cards, maybe a list of ticket out the door things. Name 2 things that we learned about today. Name 3 characters from the story, or name 1 character from the story. A list of story starters, some dice or spinners, and then I would periodically change the contents to keep it interesting. But what I would use this for is kind of like my my rescue box. So if things needed to change, I wouldn't have to run to the closet of doom and search through there to find a game. I had all these things right at my fingertips, and I could find a way to relate them to whatever content or therapy goals or whatever we were working on. So just a thought to, again, kind of stay organized and have things easy to find so that you don't lose your group while you're looking for them. Okay, so those were a lot of ideas on just kind of preventing problems and being organized and making the best use of keeping our kids on track. Now let's talk a little bit more about executive function and some things that are specific, strategies specific to that area. And one of the articles I read talked about thinking of executive function as the brain's GPS. And it's the thing that drives our ability, and that's global positioning, of course, system, but that drives our ability to focus and solve problems, organize ourselves, remember information, learn from our mistakes, manage our impulses, and learn efficiently and manage social skills. So lots of big things in our GPS for executive function. Some other things I found as I've been looking at research is that they're now finding, as I do more research on executive function, that it develops at different rates through adulthood, and that the frontal lobe, of course we knew that, was involved, you know, that's the main GPS, and that many students have delayed development, and not all of them have been identified as having a disability. So that delay in development, you know, may or may not be, you know, a kid who's in special ed or even on your caseload, that it's often seen with students with autism and ADHD, we mentioned that, and also seen in students with problematic behaviors. Okay, so it's like executive function is the central control processes in our brain that connect, prioritize, integrate operation of other subordinate brain functions. It's crucial to organizing and integrating our cognitive processes over time, and it plays a role, it becomes more and more important as we mature. So some skills associated with executive functioning, we've talked about some of these, I think, really. Mental flexibility, which our kids with autism often do not have. Behavioral ability to initiate something, planning and problem solving, self-monitoring, having that abstract reasoning, concept formation. Our kids with language disorders often do not have that. Inhibiting that impulsive response, and learning rules. So if you see all of these things, you see where some of our organizing the environment in our speech therapy room can come into play. Okay, so here are a list of behaviors that impact executive function skills. And we're going to go over these later, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but the big ones are memory. Learning and cognitive, we're not going to spend a lot of time strategies-wise because that's where we use our therapy strategies for language and many other things. Organization and planning, though, are big, focusing and attention, and impulse control and self-monitoring. So I'm going to leave these here, and we will come back to them periodically because we'll go through memory, organization and planning, focusing and attention, and impulse control and self-monitoring as strategies. Okay, and so here's, I think that means executive functioning, but I don't know why it got cut off. The picture probably moved. But there's just a, you know, view of where all the centers are for executive functioning. And we see a lot of these problems, these school-based problems can be linked to poor executive functioning. Executive functioning skills are required for student success. What are the behaviors or learning issues that most concern you as an SLP? If you could, so we know that as we've talked through this, that academic success involves these executive function skills. And so we want to see what we can do to help kids in that. And we're kind of thinking of this as a roadmap of strategies. And the four big areas, as I mentioned earlier, are these: memory, organization and planning, focusing attention, and impulse control and self-monitoring. So they kind of go together there. So we think of the GPS thing. Okay, so now here's a student with memory issues. Ellie is in 5th grade and struggles to pay attention in class. She genuinely wants to do well, especially in math. Memorizing basic math facts has always been hard for her, but finally she can do the math worksheets, as long as there is no time limit. Word problems, however, always stop her in her tracks. By the time she reads the whole question, she cannot remember what the first part said. So she resorts to her guess and go method, which seldom works. The gaps in her understanding of math concepts and her poor attention to detail make the work so overwhelming to Ellie that she feels like giving up. Okay, so we're going to do a poll. What kind of memory problems does Ellie have? And she can have more than one. Is it poor encoding or taking in information to short-term memory? Is it poor processing and working memory? Is it poor storage and long-term memory? Is it poor retrieval from long-term memory? But you guys are right. It's the first two. 43% poor encoding and 79% poor processing. And those are her major issues. And so we're going to talk in a few minutes about some strategies to help her. Okay, but there's one other kid who has memory issues. And come on, it's not moving. There it goes. This is Kirk. Kirk is in 9th grade and he's having the same problem in math as he did in middle school. He seems to understand the math lesson when his teacher asks him questions that day, but the next day things are fuzzy. Here today and gone tomorrow seems to be the pattern. He frequently makes careless mistakes, such as skipping steps when solving complex problems. In fact, he sometimes skips entire rows of problems, especially under testing conditions. If the work is too demanding, he usually gives up instead of asking for help. Kirk's math teacher thinks that if he could just slow down and recheck his work before handing it in, he could do better than a D. Okay, so what kind of memory problems does Kirk have? And again, you see the same four issues, and he can also have more than one kind. And the majority of the votes are saying poor storage in long-term memory and poor retrieval in long-term memory, and you are exactly right. Not so much the processing and working memory, but I can see where you think about that too. But the last two are the major issues that he has. Okay, so what do we do about these kinds of memory issues? Okay, so these are in your PowerPoint. So I want to encourage you at some point to go in to the resources, and Lydia's going to tell you how to get there if she hasn't already. But we have a resource section, and the PowerPoint will be there, and these lists of strategies are in the PowerPoint. But here are just some ideas. Modeling lessons and assignments and instructions, helping them see the small sequential steps in the entire process. Start by telling what to focus on and why. And this is all encoding, by the way, so think of Ellie. Often students with memory issues miss the big ideas and important details, so draw attention to them. Have students verbalize and draw images or use concrete techniques and materials. Help students link the skills and concepts through not just verbal, and sometimes as SLPs we're so strong in verbal we forget the visual, but through verbal and visual spatial memory systems and through active learning. Use brain-friendly memory tools. Mnemonics, songs, rhymes, analogies can help. Teach students to highlight important information and to make margin notes. This is like a really cool skill, and our kids often don't even have an idea about it. So this helps them separate important from less important. Okay, so here's some ideas for encoding. This is an example kind of coming from the Common Core actually, but when you get ready to read a story with your students or your therapy group, give them a statement and tell them that they have to look for the answers to that statement. Is it true? Is there proof for it? Is there proof against it? So even though snakes scare people, people also scare snakes. Could that be true? This is about from a story where a snake gets loose in a house. And then all snakes bite people. Well, this snake didn't bite people, so they had to read the story as we read it together. Then they had to find, we listed this up on the whiteboard, what was the proof for or proof against. And that's kind of a big thing, finding evidence in the Common Core standards. And then this is just another idea. You're going to read a story and we look at the cover and we think about what the title is and we predict what the book would be about, what might happen in the book. And then as we read the book, we find proof for or proof against what our predictions were. And then I just love these. I think foldables are just a great technique with our kids, again, to get more visuals. So these are examples off the internet of different types of foldables. Like this one, it's a tab book, and each one of these is separated. This one's also a tab book, but it's going kind of in the opposite direction. Sometimes we draw posters of things and we put those on the wall. So most of these are kind of foldables and flip books. I guess you could call them that. But these are great ways to consolidate that information, and that kid who has trouble encoding can go back and look at these and refer to them, and it really helps cement the concepts you want them to learn. This is an example of a concept map, and sometimes for older kids this is better than, the foldables, but maybe not. The topic is here, and then the 4 main points are here, and then the details are here. And they could still draw pictures if you wanted them to, but again, you're giving them a visual and you're consolidating all the information they need to learn in one place. And then highlighting. Here's an example. Just, highlighting feels good. I like this. You draw people's attention to a word, even a whole word sentence. And then making notes in the margin, that was another strategy. And then this was a kind of a cool one, just looking at using sticky notes to highlight things, to ask questions, and you could give each student in your group a sticky note and say, I want you to do one of these things, or I want you to, so just these are just examples. I want you to look closely. I want you to draw and label. I want you to write what just happened. Write like a scientist. So you could either give each person a different one, or you could give them all the same one and ask them to use that with the material, whatever book or thing that, topic that you're working on. Okay, so now what about working memory? Create consistent routines, like getting materials ready for class, responding in class, recording homework assignments. So again, kind of going back to our beginning where we talked about having a routine for therapy and having some basic procedures that even though you're not thinking that's helping for strategies for memory, it can. Then using visual aids, just like we talked about, teaching students to repeat directions, use engaging games and activities, and avoiding or reducing the amount of copying if the kids have trouble with that or have a visual memory weakness. And I just have a few examples here. And this is, of course, the see and do thought here. But, here's one for a schedule. Today my schedule will be, and the student checks it off. Either checks off what's happening or they check off the things that they're going to do that day. They might leave one out. Oh no. Here's one that looks at visual cues for requesting help. So we have a student who sometimes tantrums or breaks down if he can't do something. So when I need help, I should follow these steps. Check the directions, ask a friend, ask a teacher. Those visuals really can help. And then sometimes we need to teach them to repeat directions or steps to be support, to kind of help themselves. So positive self-talk can be one. We as adults, we can do that easily. We can tell ourselves, we're going to get through this. I know this is really hard, but I'm going to get through it. But kids don't always have positive self-talk, and they're finding that if you can give them some phrases or teach them some self-talk techniques, or give them actually the language for the self-talk, then it can help build self-esteem and improve performance. Okay, so I'm running through these quickly. Sorry, we're running near the end, but the main thing is you can go back and look at these again. So long-term memory, how do we get that into our long-term memory and storage? So they say multiple storage paths are important. So using a lot of different modalities to get that information into different parts of the brain. And then recall can be easier and faster. Provide opportunities. Now we're talking about Kirk, remember, had the long-term issues. Provide opportunities for repeated practice to strengthen the pathways. Teach students to use visual organizers to consolidate information into categories. Again, those graphic organizers and visuals. Make sure students can explain why the skill is important or relevant, because our brain will delete things that are not that meaningful or important. So connecting that is important. It can help. Spend extra time on what is learned in the middle. Have you ever noticed that sometimes your kids know what happened first and they know what happened at the end, but they can't remember anything in the middle? So sometimes you need extra work on that. And again, those foldables and graphic organizers can be helpful. There's just an example of some. I use this a lot with my elementary school kids. It's a four corners map, and I imported the pictures from the story, but usually I have them draw the pictures. And so this is great for a narrative, so we get all the important information, well, not all, but a lot, about the beginning, the problem, the solution, the ending. We have the title, we know who the main characters are, we know what the setting is, and eventually at the end we write the main idea. And when I do this one, I always tell people, fill it out slowly. You don't need to fill it all out at one time. And often I have it up on the whiteboard and they can copy mine or copy parts of mine, and they can draw their own pictures. But then eventually they have trouble getting it into long-term memory, but they can retell the story using the pictures and the information there. So you kind of hit, story grammar, narrative skills, main idea, and retelling a story all in one basic graphic organizer. Okay, getting near the end here. Again, use foldables, and this is an example of how to make a little book. And in the little book we put our words, or we could put important concepts from the story. And I went to a workshop where they showed us how to take these little cereal boxes and cover them with paper, let the kids decorate them, and they put their little books, cut out one, like the right side of it, and they put their little books in the cereal box. It's almost like a little cover. What's the word? I can't think of the word. It's like they can keep all their books together. So Julie, go get your library, you can call it a library, from the bookshelf, and let's go over, and you bring it back out. So you don't send these things home until the end of the year, so you can use them many different ways. Then there's also other things, the tab books, 2 columns, trifolds, T-charts. All these things can help kids organize their ideas and let them draw pictures to go with them. And this one I even use to do syllabication. So when we get a big word, we break it down and we call it scooping, detective. And then what do they do? And so then we go through it and we draw a picture to help us remember it. Okay, here are instructions for that poof book I told you about, so I won't spend time on that. Okay, so as we get to the end, which strategies do you feel would be best? So what we want you to do is choose 2 strategies that you think would work for Ellie based on all those encoding and working memory strategies. Choose 2 strategies that you think would work best for Kirk, looking at the long-term memory strategies. And then take the quiz to get your CEUs at the end of the webinar. You have to take a quiz, and Lydia's going to tell you how to get there. And the 2 last questions of the quiz are these. So, okay, and then I have a bunch of references for you. So, have a good evening.